Some historic perspective on Turkey. We're joined by the director of the Center for Global Research and Security at the RAND Corporation, Andrew Parasiliti. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You know, we often hear that Turkey is in a place that straddles east and west. When we look at what the president is now trying to do, and we look at where Turkey has come from over the past 90 years, how does one reconcile the two? I mean, what are the main religious and cultural characteristics of this country that make it so unique?
Well, what makes it so unique is that you have an important Muslim country that does indeed geographically straddle east and west, and its role has always been defined in both east and west. Kemal Ataturk, you talked about him at the beginning, his vision of Turkey was nationalist, it was modern, it was secular. But Turkey is also a religious country, it's also a conservative country, and that tension and dynamic in Turkish politics and Turkish society exists to this day. As a reporter pointed out, President Erdogan tends to tilt more now towards an Islamist agenda, both in Turkey and also, one might say, in the Middle East, at times, a sectarian Sunni Islamist agenda in its foreign policy.
So, is the idea of a secular Turkish state, is it a notion of the past then?
I don't think it's a notion of the past. I think this tension between tradition and modernity, between religiosity and secular democracy is very much at the core of Turkish identity. I don't know if it's going to be resolved, but it will continue to be a tension, as you saw during his remarks about women. To those in the West who might look at that and say, oh my gosh, what's he saying now? But he got wide applause. I think those remarks might satisfy a conservative religious base, which tends to be where Erdogan draws most of his support in Turkish political culture. It will also upset many modern and secular Turks, which is also a very important strand in the society as well.
Right, talking about where he gets his support from, because there are some analysts who say that even when Mustafa Ataturk introduced those secular ideas into Turkey, that they found a lot of currency among the urban elite, but not among those people who live in the countryside, and that is where Erdogan is now tapping his power from.
That's a fair point. I think, again, you continue to see is the urban elite secular class. That tends to be where you will find those who are most committed to pushing Turkey toward a Western orientation, toward a modern orientation, toward a democratic orientation. Whereas President Erdogan and the AK party tends to draw its roots from a more traditional conservative base.
There appears to be a realignment of policies in Turkey, not just in terms of the fact that secular parties have been losing power, but also the president shifting away from the West. Turkey has often been identified with the West. It's been one of the most important members of NATO for a very long time, but that's changing, isn't it?
I think Turkey is in the transition in how it sees its role, both within NATO, within the West, and how it looks at the East. Again, your correspondent made, I think, a compelling point. The Turks and President Erdogan have looked at the EU, where they are still in the application mode for EU membership, and that hasn't happened, and there's been a lot of frustration there. On the other hand, part of President Erdogan's vision in foreign policy is to play a role in the Middle East. And he and some of his colleagues and people in the government have talked about the Ottoman past and the Ottoman role in the region. And I think Turkey has aspirations looking to the east, and you see a lot of this playing out in Syria, for example, and Iraq, where Turkey is taking a number of steps, which, especially in Syria, which may not be in direct sync with what the United States and NATO and the Western Alliance want.
That shift away to a more independent foreign policy, some may call it an isolationist foreign policy, does that resonate a great deal with his party base, his power base, if I could call it that, especially among religious parties and religious leaders?
It may resonate with some, but I think Turkish foreign policy over the last few years has been complicating for the Turkish government, and according to which polls you see, not always widely popular. What has happened, I wouldn't say isolationist. Turkey wants to play a more assertive role in Syria, for example. but not more assertive going after Islamic State, as the U.S. would want, but more assertive going after the government of Bashar al-Assad. So Turkey's looking to play a role. Turkey has looked to play a key role in Iraq due to its relationship with the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and Turkey probably had a role and is at the minimum pleased with the deal that has been worked out between the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan regional government on oil exports, which will allow the flow of oil through Turkey as well. So I wouldn't say isolationist, but I would say there are points of friction and tension between Turkey and the Western alliance, especially when it comes to Syria.
And it has translated into significant political success for him at home.
I don't know if I would go that far. I think there are many questions within Turkey.
Well, he's won a lot of elections, hasn't he?
He sure has, yes. He's president of Turkey, and when you look at the domestic political situation in Turkey, Erdogan has been divisive. Erdogan has his detractors, but he also, to this point, has no real competition in the Turkish political landscape, and that has allowed him to carry out a lot of these controversial policies.
3 years ago, Erdogan was on the cover of Time magazine, and he was being praised for being what they called a role model for moderate Islam. In the past 3 years, has that changed?
I would say yes. Given what Erdogan says in foreign policy, especially from a U.S. perspective, one might have some concerns. 4 days after Vice President Biden left Turkey in November, he referred to the United States as impertinent in Syria. He also made a statement last week, I believe, where he said that the West likes to see Muslim children die. He has also made very provocative statements about Israel, very anti-Israeli statements, and is also a supporter of Hamas. So hard to say that he would be a candidate this year for a role model for a moderate Islamic leader.
But I guess there must be a recognition in the West as well that in many instances he is talking to his constituency in Turkey.
That's correct. That's correct. But the U.S. and the West also have pretty complicated and difficult interests in Syria and Turkey, in Syria and Iraq, dealing with Iran, and in the Middle East. And as we began the conversation by saying, Turkey is a key player, a NATO ally, and the West needs to look to Turkey to play a constructive role in all of these areas. NATO and the West want Turkey on board in what they're doing in Syria and Iraq, but so far what you see is a more transactional type of conversation between the U.S. and Turkey over Syria, for example, rather than a conversation marked by a clear partnership and complete agreement on interests there.
Andrew Parasiliti, great insights. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We